It is now 4 o'clock, so we will call to order today's meeting of the Heritage Commission. Today is Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. I request that the staff confirm that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Matter of Open Meetings Act requirements, and I will call roll. Commissioner Mike Sell.
Present.
Commissioner Gilmore.
Here.
Commissioner Martin. Commissioner Baffa.
Here.
Commissioner Ivy.
Here.
Commissioner Seibel.
Here.
Chair Gillum.
Here.
So we do have a quorum present, and we thank you all for attending this special meeting of the Heritage Commission.
Thank you. We will start with the item 2.1, approval of the meeting minutes from the January 25th, 2023 regular meeting. And I'll give everyone just a few minutes to review those and ask any questions of staff that they may have.
Because they're really long.
I move we approve.
I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion to approve and seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. And we will move on then to new business. It appears we have one public hearing item today. Item 3.1, application HC 23-1, the consideration of a request from the Historic Preservation Office for comments on the eligibility of Peter Science Hall on the Kansas Wesleyan University campus for potential listing on the National Register of Historic Places and the Register of Historic Kansas Places.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have just wanted to call to your attention, and it's in the letter that is the cover letter from the State Historic Preservation Office. We took on face value. We had 4 different items of correspondence from them listing the address of Peter Science Hall as 124 East Cloud. 124 East Cloud is actually a single-family home that's on the south side of the street, and so the correct address is 131 East Cloud on the odd side of the street. And so we did provide notice of today's meeting, and the letter, just as all the other correspondence, erroneously referred to it as 124. However, all the maps and everything that we provided correctly located the property. Everything in your packet correctly locates where the property is for whatever reason or whatever source. The Kansas SHPO attached 124 to this property. So we will get that corrected moving forward, but we are on the north side of the street on the Kansas Wesleyan University campus, and for old persons like myself, it's hard to wrap around the idea that a building constructed in 1969 is historic, but it is over 50 years old and does qualify, and that time period of construction has some unique architectural and historical characteristics in its own right. So while we looked at Pioneer Hall, which dated back to a much earlier time, as we note in our report, this is a modern movement academic facility that's located on the Kansas Wesleyan University campus. It was completed and occupied in 1969. It was placed on vacant land that it was at the southeast corner of the campus. I think in your packet there's a 1967 aerial photo of the campus that shows this area as vacant or blank. It's distinguished by its 4-story height with its rooftop observatory, and It's white concrete facades with vertical slot windows. The historic preservation consultant points out that this has retained a medium to high degree of historic integrity and clearly portrays the character-defining features of a 1960s building design and construction. So this property is being nominated and put forward due to its architectural significance and as a property that's been associated with events that have made a significant contribution to Salina's history as well as the history of Kansas Wesleyan University. Like the Pioneer Hall nomination, Kansas Wesleyan has worked with Brenda Spencer of Spencer Preservation to put together a nomination for this property, and that was submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office. We received correspondence from the Preservation Office asking us for local comments about the nomination. The Kansas Historic Sites Board of Review is meeting on May 6th, so they've asked us to provide these comments in advance of that, and so we thank you for agreeing to this special meeting. We have provided the nomination form there. We've sent out notice to property owners within 200 feet of this property to see if they have any comment. And so, as a certified local government, the Heritage Commission and the chief elected body are required to comment on the eligibility of all properties nominated to the national or state register. So, as we pointed out, we are a certified local government. There are currently 15 properties listed on the National Register within the Salina city limits. We were informed that as of January 4th, 2023, Pioneer Hall on this campus was added to the list of national historic places as well as the state register. And we provided you a summary of other recent nominations, which include the National Bank of America building at Iron and Santa Fe, the Lowell School building on Highland, the Norton Apartments on East Iron, Christ Church Cathedral on South 8th, and then you're familiar with what's happening with the H.D. Lee buildings. Those buildings were placed on the National Register in 2008. As we do in every report, seemingly, we provide our obligatory update on St. John's Hospital. And so what has occurred there is that that was approved for listing on the state Kansas Register of Historic Places. That was sent up to the National Park Service. The National Park Service requested additional information from the state and from the preservation consultant. Some of that information was provided, but what has occurred is that the former owners have parted with the property. Rosen Preservation is no longer involved, and it's not clear to staff whether the new owner is proceeding with the federal tax credit application or with pursuing the National Register listing. So I think we've done enough of these that one of the financial incentives involved in doing a National Register nomination is that it can make a project eligible for state and federal rehabilitation tax credits, and those have been used on a number of properties. And with the chair's experience with the Stiefel Theater and the Lee buildings, she's probably more of an expert on that than anyone on staff because she has firsthand experience. But some of the reason and motivation for the National and State Register status is the eligibility for tax credits. And so the nomination form that was prepared by Brenda Spencer focused on this property being associated with events that have a significant contribution to Salina's history and then dealing with whether this building has distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction that represents a significant or distinguishing entity. And so we've given you a little bit of background again about the Kansas Wesleyan University as an institution, as a campus. They had an original science hall that was built in 1908. They determined that to be obsolete and inadequate, and so there were funds that were raised to build a new science building, and a local architectural and engineering firm, Wilson and Company, was involved with the design, and so it was named for a longtime faculty member who began teaching at the university in 1909. And so this building was dedicated in 1969 and named for Professor Peters. There is an association between Wilson and Company and this building and Kansas Wesleyan. Wilson and Company was the designer of the new Science Hall. They also have designed other campus buildings before and since. This is considered, as I noted, the modern movement architecture, and some of those elements are also found in the dormitories that are on the Kansas Wesleyan campus. But the modern movement has certain characteristics that became popular on college campuses in the 1960s, and so we have a combination of concrete and steel building with the concrete facades and their vertical slot windows and the notable rooftop observatory. And so the belief was, as a science facility, that daylight was not necessarily desirable inside, so the natural light for the building was provided in corridors only, and that kind of accounts for the unique window design. So part of the application provides information about the notable history of Wilson and Company that recently celebrated its 90th anniversary and is still present in Salina. And Wilson and Company has designed some other buildings, including the Salina's current post office and the gas service building over on Edison Place. Those are some examples of other Wilson and Company designs. And so we provided some information provided by the architect about the characteristics of the modern movement, and pointing out that much of the historic integrity of the original building remains in place. The two major changes was removal of a greenhouse dome that was on the top of the one-story west bay, and then there's been some modifications to the north-south window wells. And so the conclusion is that this still retains a high degree of integrity. So we have outlined on page 10 of the report items that we think could be made as findings that would support a nomination of this property to the National or State Register. And part of it is that it anchors the southeast corner of the campus, and development of that campus is intertwined with the history of Salina. The hall is noted, associated with a notable local design firm. It still embodies distinctive characteristics of the late modern movement style, and it retains a high degree of historic and architectural integrity. So after discussion, any questions that you have, your options this afternoon would be to concur with the findings in the nomination form and make a recommendation to the City Commission that you feel the Peters Science Hall meets the criteria for eligibility for listing of the property on the state and national registers. You could decline to concur with those findings and recommend to the City Commission that it's your finding that those criteria for eligibility are not met. You could postpone this hearing until additional information could be obtained from Kansas Wesleyan or from their consultant. So those would be your choices. Again, the reason for the timing of our special meeting was to allow you to provide your comments and your opinions on the eligibility of this property, to be able to get those to the City Commission, and then to allow the City Commission to decide whether they want to support the nomination. And so, based on the findings we've set out on page 10, we believe that meeting the eligibility requirements have been met. So with that, we'd be open to any questions that you have. We did forward this information to representatives of Kansas Wesleyan. What I do not know and cannot say is if there's any sort of renovation project being proposed for this building that might utilize the tax credits. In the case of Pioneer Hall, we are aware of some pending projects and improvements to that building. I don't know that to be the case here, but we have presented this to you to see if you have any comments or questions about the nomination.
Anyone have questions for staff? You answered my one question, which was going to be if they were planning any kind of renovation project.
So I don't.
Mine too.
I mean, there are different motivations that people have for seeking a National Register nomination, but many times that motivation is to avail yourself of the tax credit financing. And in many of the other cases that we brought before you, we knew that there was a renovation or a project that might utilize those credits, but we are not aware of any project that's proposed for this building or the exact reasoning for bringing this forward or the timing. It may have been that they had a better understanding of the process and all for what happened with Pioneer Hall and wanted to follow up with this building, but I don't have that information for you directly.
There could be other buildings on campus that may be eligible for this designation too, is that correct?
I would believe that perhaps the Memorial Library might be one. In terms of the criteria, the general rule of thumb is that it has to be at least 50 years old, and there has been a recent trend where some home styles, commercial building styles and things are uniquely 1960s architecture, and you are seeing more and more buildings that were constructed in the 60s being nominated as National Register properties. Part of that is desire for property protection, and in some cases it is desire to utilize the tax credits. But there has been a recent trend and identification that there is, whether it's homes or commercial buildings, that there is a fairly unique 1960s style.
We're ready for a motion?
If there's no more questions of staff and no discussion to be had, then, yes, I believe we are.
Josh, you look like you're ready.
I move that the Heritage Commission move with option 1, and we concur with the findings in the nomination form and make a recommendation to the City Commission that Peters Science Hall meets the applicable criteria for eligibility for listing on the property on the historic, or the Kansas Register of Historic Places and the National Register of Historic Places.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to concur with the findings, staff's findings for the Peters Science Hall, that it meets the applicable criteria for eligibility for listing on Kansas Register and National Register. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes.
So what will happen next is that we will take your recommendation to the City Commission on May 1st, and if they concur with that, then we will send your comments up to the State Historic Preservation Office, so when they meet on May the 6th, they will have our local comments. And so I appreciate your taking the time to review this and provide your feedback. We do not have any administrative items for you or preliminary discussion items. And for our unfinished or other business, we would just report that because you've had this special meeting on the 12th, the regularly scheduled quarterly meeting on the 26th will not be held. And so we will not meet on the 26th, and we will send out a reminder to that effect. And so that is no foreseeable meetings in the future unless we get another application that we will bring forward, and if it doesn't line up with a quarterly meeting, then we will attempt to schedule a special meeting.
Okay.
So I think that's all we have for you this afternoon.
Has there been any discussion about policing Santa Fe Business District and Historic Place?
There has been some discussion about that, but there has not been a study session or anything like that put together to discuss those implications. The only thing that we had done previously is we had someone from the state of Kansas, and we had a preservation planner from the city of Wichita and a developer, and they came and spoke to a special meeting of the downtown board of advisors, and that was set up by SDI, and we haven't had a similar meeting like that for some time, but that was occurred so that downtown building owners and merchants could weigh the pros and cons of that, but there was not a consensus on moving forward with anything different than what we're currently doing. But we can schedule at a future meeting discussions about what the implications of a historic district are as opposed to the individual properties. Right now, what is occurring downtown is that there are individual property nominations that are put forward, and so obviously the majority of our National Register properties are in or near the downtown area, but on a case-by-case basis. So.
Now, there was a comment in the previous minutes about the April meeting. We were going to be reviewing the downtown vacancy and demolition by neglect ordinance. Is that going to be pushed on to the next quarterly meeting then?
It's going to be pushed until we were approached by some of the board of SDI about being interested in having the city adopt a vacancy ordinance. And what a vacancy ordinance is, it's more or less like a registration ordinance for the city. And it happens a lot of places where you have absentee ownership, but basically it requires a building owner to notify the city and to notify SDI that the building they own is currently a vacant structure, so that it can be monitored for, it just get more scrutiny, more eyes on it to make sure that it's not deteriorating, it's not being damaged. It's mostly to just put people on notice that this is not an active space anymore. The other thing it does is if it links up properties with, say, SDI, that maybe somebody is looking for a pop-up space or a short-term space or whatever, it just helps SDI and city staff to monitor spaces that are vacant and available, and just to know that they're not active spaces anymore. And because they reached out to us but didn't provide us with anything about what they were looking for, they're going to have to provide us with, this is what we're talking about, before we can bring it to you to discuss. So when SDI follows up and gets us something and says this is what we'd like to see, we would want to bring that to this board and just get your feedback and comments on it. But that has not occurred yet.
Further south on Santa Fe is a building, house that is scheduled for demolition. What's the status there?
Well, we have had a changeover in the building official position, and so what happened with that property was that the property owner went to the city commission and got 3 extensions and told the city commission that they wanted to hire a contractor and that they would do the demolition themselves if they got the time extensions. They got the time extensions. No contractor would take the job, and so now the city has it on its list to oversee its demolition through city contract. And so what that means is that the city will hire a contractor to do the demolition, and then essentially we'll levy the cost of that back as a lien against the lot. And so once the site is cleared, the property will have a lien, and then if anybody wants to buy it and do something else there, they'll have to pay that lien off. But we don't want to be the contractor of first resort, and the city doesn't like administering that. And so when the owners told the city commission that they would do it themselves, they just needed more time, they got 2 extensions, and they have not followed through on either of those extensions.
It's quite a long timely process.
I would say it's quite a long time in the process, but with the changeover in staffing in the building services department, the timelines and everything had to be reconnected. So I guess if you have specific questions about that, those will have to be taken up with the building official, but he has that information, he's aware of it, and it's his job to oversee the hiring of a contractor to get it removed.
So it's working.
The process isn't working the way it's supposed to, but it is in motion to get that home removed from the property. But it's always going to take longer if the city has to put it out for bid and go through that process than if the owner just agrees to tear it down themselves, which this owner agreed to do in front of the city commission. So.
And there's another vacant building a couple blocks south, and looks like it's in badly need of repair. Looks to be vacant. Is there any?
When you say building, are you referring to a dwelling?
Yes.
Are you talking about the gray one that's next to Maori Clinic?
Could be, yeah.
That one's been on the edge and the precipice in the past. Mr. Berger had even been able to obtain some emergency repair and grant funds to provide to those owners to make some emergency repairs, particularly to the front porch and things like that. But that one is teetering on the brink of getting to be so neglected that it might tip the other way. But that is one of the things when we discuss the concept of a demolition by neglect ordinance. A demolition by neglect ordinance is an ordinance that allows cities to step in before it gets to that point. We have some property maintenance codes and some other things that we can enforce, but a lot of those things are not aesthetic. But that property has been tipping on the edge for about 15 years. I mean, it's been if you saw the notices and correspondence and things to the owner, it's probably as thick as any address file in the city in terms of, and generally the owners do just enough to get off the demolition list.
And then lastly, next to the painted silos, those buildings are in such horrible condition. What's happening there?
Well, part of it is that those buildings are very expensive to demolish. And so the owner of those buildings purportedly is actively marketing them and trying to solicit tenants for those, but it's generally not occurring. But we have, we don't know what the results are, but the City Commission just finished up 2 days of what is referred to as strategic planning to set their goals and priorities, and if they indicate that those are goals and priorities to step up our efforts in that area, then we will have to devote more people and resources to that. But our division is currently down about 5 people, and so we're not doing any new initiatives. We're taking care of the basics, but to be more proactive in that area, we would need, first of all, to get up to full staff, and secondly, we would need some direction from the City Commission that they want us to devote more resources to that.
And I know those buildings are not on the national or the state register, but those are, isn't that the H. Seeley Flour Mill?
It
Do you know?
is.
Is it on our list of significant places for Salina? Do you know?
I think it is a conservation property, which would mean that it couldn't be removed without Heritage Commission review. But we haven't had anything put forward in that regard that I'm aware of. We've had some development review team meetings about prospective users or uses of those buildings, but none of them have come to fruition.
Okay.
But they're not at a landmark status or anything, but we do have around 200 older properties in the city that are considered to be heritage conservation properties, and so they're protected from demolition without a prior review of the Heritage Commission. So those, but it's demolition only. We're not reviewing cosmetic things or renovations or those. It's just that they cannot be demolished without a review and hearing by the Heritage Commission, but we've not had anybody come forward with that.
Okay. Well, it doesn't look like we have anybody for public forum today, so,
Don't have anyone on Zoom, I can confirm that.
thank you. Well, in that case, if you all are ready to adjourn the meeting, I would take a motion to do so.
So moved.
Seconded.
So motion second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Came prepared.
Great, thanks, everyone.